Welcome, viewers, to this new episode of Beyond Phrenology. We have Michael Silberstein and Louis Favela with us again. They have been on Beyond Phrenology a couple of months back in a very interesting episode. Today, we'll be discussing something more about neuroscience. Especially, we'll dive into this new era where we have artificial intelligence and we have large language models, which have been democratized. Almost every one of us are using, and we are finding these models more capable of cognitive work, which humans were supposed to be uniquely capable of. And that has strengthened the whole idea that human brain and computers work very similarly, or at least at certain levels. And being ecological psychologist, or at least having sympathy with the ecological ideas, where the whole, we have been denouncing the computational metaphor and promoting fluid and dynamical systems alternatives to understanding human brain and cognition, or organismal cognition. Uh, it's kind of a setback to the community as such, with more and more ill-founded assumptions of similarities between these systems, especially when we have surface level similarities in the output of those systems. Uh, so welcome, Louis, and welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having us, Madhu. Appreciate it. It's a good opportunity to talk about a intersection of ideas that I think is near and dear, Michael's and my heart.
Mhm.
And I should have said hearts because Michael and I don't share a heart. We actually differ on some things. So we'll see where we intersect, where we agree, and where we disagree.
Hmm.
I yeah, thanks for having us. So Louis and I have been, toying with writing a paper about this, and we've been having some discussions. And so just to try to frame, I think we agree about this much. Just to try to frame what we might say is, um, doesn't seem like, the debates about the nature of Gen AI in terms of, does it really think? Does it understand? Does it perceive? Might it have experience? All that sort of stuff. Um, don't look very different from, the days of Searle and other people and Dreyfus having these discussions about Chinese rooms and Turing tests. So, even, what's that quote? Is it the Dreyfus or whatever? Nothing in AI has, the common sense of a lobster, or the real world capacity for reasoning. But that's still true, right? Nothing has changed. It's still about making claims about how all these things like learning and thinking or whatever are just about inputs and outputs. Um, it's just, I think it's closet behaviorism or whatever. And then when you challenge people that, this is not at all how brains work, then they double down and they're like, no, look, you know, because this stuff is so surprising when you have a conversation with it, you should believe, it's the closest thing we've made to having a conversation with a human. So, you should believe that really the crazy thing we're revealing is this is what brains really do, which to me is just a reductio. And I think the reality is, these people, leaving aside what Alan Turing really had in mind for a moment, I think these people just built technology designed to pass the Turing test. Congratulations, you can fool a lot of people, but you know, there's this is not what brains really do, even the brains of non-human animals. And we all know that this is the statistical, stochastic parrot criticism is right on the mark. So it's a clever trick, but I don't see much more to it.
I think I agree with what Michael said. And one thing that I want to maybe clarify just a little bit is I think Michael rightly said that people said, "Oh, these machines they're not only are they producing outputs that are behaviorally, and that could mean anything linguistic, producing images,
Hmm.
solving a problem, and it looks very human-like." And then there's a further argument they say, and that's how our brains work. And so I think people need to be careful to distinguish two things. And I think this is my fault as well. And I definitely openly say this is a criticism towards people promoting Gen AI is, are you saying that you are producing intelligence? And for people who are just listening to this, I just put up scare quotes. Are you producing intelligence just kind of abstractly, however we want to define intelligence, or are we trying to develop systems that are brain-like and whatever intelligence goes along with brains? And I think these are separate questions. I don't think, I don't want to speak for Madhur or Michael, but I think most people are probably open to the idea that there are non-brain forms or non-brain sources of
Yeah.
intelligence. It might go all the way down to sea slugs or amoebas, plants, simple, C.
Hmm.
elegans, and then going up and up and up. And not all of these have nervous systems. Certainly none of them have brains the way we do. So I think this is, one area where I'd appreciate more clarity in the debates and in the hype, right? Are you
Uh-huh.
saying that you're just addressing intelligence, or are you addressing like neurointelligence?
Hmm.
So I'm actually curious if Michael or Madhur, maybe you guys don't see that as big of a problem, or you do. I'm not. I'd be curious to hear what you think.
So,
Um,
yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead, Maduro. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would say that I think we are stuck with surface similarities. So for instance, take the case of a classic cappuccino. You order a cappuccino at a nice cafe and the barista makes you a cappuccino, right? Then you also have cappuccino machines. You can buy a cheap cappuccino machine and it makes a cappuccino in a very mechanical process. And it might taste or not taste good. And eventually you can say that, cappuccino is bad, it's a machine-made cappuccino. But now we have machines which are so good, you can buy a cappuccino machine for like $10,000, right? And and you will see that like the cappuccino is better than 90% of the baristas, right? Because it has consistency, it has perfected the art of cappuccino. So now the question is that if our benchmark of understanding the system is the cappuccino, then of course cappuccino machine is better and we have replicated the barista. But if you think of barista as more, a mushy mass who can be both entertaining and, serving you cappuccino and can also be beautiful, uh, and a potential mate, for instance, I mean, there are a lot of things in a barista which are not there in, a cappuccino machine. So when you take the whole human and you take the whole flesh behind that cappuccino, then it's a false comparison. And I think we are making this false comparison between LLMs and human cognition even now. I would have expected much better from neuroscientists, but as we have, whined about, the state of modern neuroscience, especially cognitive neuroscience, in the last podcast, uh, I would be more than happy if a lot of LLMs can actually replace a lot of neuroscientists at this point.
You're definitely making me want a cappuccino. But I agree with both of you, and unsurprisingly, so I agree with Louis that what are they making intelligent machines is a separate question from are they making anything like us? But I think we do know that their goal, right, is, AGI. We do know that their ultimate goal, at least as suggested by, the hype of tech bros and the moneyed interest, is to make things with AGI and quote unquote common sense or whatever. So that's what they're trying to do. Contrary to the hype, I would say by every empirical measure other than being, tricked in a conversation, they're failing to do it. And one reason they're failing to do it is because they're failing to recreate, the animals on Earth that can actually do it, right? Maybe they will do it by some other means, right? Than the way that, humans and non-human animals really work. So far, they haven't, nor have they come anywhere near capturing the way we are. And why do I believe that? Because if they were anywhere near, look, let's just say, it's a simulation of neural activity and neural networks to some degree. So they might be capturing a little something. I'm perfectly happy to grant that, there's some sub-symbolic processing involved in what humans do. And probably like a Swiss knife, there's some symbolic stuff. There's a lot of stuff. There's reasoning by metaphor and analogy. I'm sure
Mhm.
there's plenty of tricks that, animals use. Whether or not there's a theory of everything of it, I'm highly skeptical. But if they're anywhere near capturing what, real animals do, the stuff would be way more clever, right? I mean, it's not. It's still, by any measure, weak AI versus strong as we used to define those things. It's easy to trick. If in those cases where we quote unquote make it hallucinate, which is obviously anthropomorphized silly talk, and the cases where we make it, give us crazy output, if a human did that in a conversation, you would worry there was something very wrong with them. Um, yeah, I think they're failing. My point is simply, I think they're failing on both counts. They're failing to make anything very clever, and they're failing to make anything like us.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so I think Michael a minute ago said putting Turing aside, and I mostly agree with that because I think there are misreadings of Turing. Um, but I think one way in which we should look at the history, which also includes Turing, is to understand this weird like flip that happened in the intellectual landscape. And so if we look back at what was Turing and his colleagues and Alonzo Church and all these people who were working around the same time, what were they interested in? They were curious by the ability of computers, and computer was a person, a computer was a job. So you applied to be a computer. And most of these jobs were taken by women, and the job usually included a woman sitting at a desk with, typewriter or, some sort of calculator and measuring devices. And, Turing and colleagues, also the military and the government, were interested in, is there some sort of process that we can use to describe how these people do the job that they do, how they solve all these problems, right? They seem to solve a wide range of problems, and they do it regularly and they do it successfully. Can we formalize that? And I think that was the origin of the Turing machine, right? The Turing machine is supposed to be a kind of abstract system that can solve any problem that you can formalize. And by formalize, I mean put in some sort of regular rule-based kind of system. And so, based on this, we got really great things. So we were able to crack the Enigma machine during World War II. We were able to, then develop some of the early computer systems, in the 60s and
Hmm.
70s, and then moving forward, all based on universal Turing computation. But then here's the weird flip that I think happened in the intellectual landscape. We seem to have forgotten that we developed these machines to mimic or replicate in a mechanical way what humans were doing, what
Hmm.
clearly intelligent entities were doing. And it became, how are those entities like those
Yeah.
formal systems?
Right,
It
right, right.
became, how do we treat brains as Turing machines?
Hmm.
And I find that absolutely strange. I don't find it strange in a methodological way. I think it's really cool to make comparisons among things, right? I mean, this is a human desire, right? You look through history, and the Romans talked about, the mind as like a flowing aqueduct, and then you go up through, Leibniz, he talks about the windmill, and so on. We always appeal to technology as ways to, be metaphorical, right, to help understand. But it's just really odd to me seeing,
Hmm.
this push in AI and push in neuroscience to then flip it the other way. And I don't know when that happened, and I don't know if that's
Uh,
justified.
But
So
it's
that's kind of my view. I'm curious if you guys see it
uh-huh.
that way, or not.
just as a brief addendum, we're constantly doing this in science, right? So we're constantly getting mugged by our own models and metaphors, right? So, whether it's clockwork or, the brain is a computer, or now it's a Gen AI network or whatever, we just can't resist swapping, the map and the territory, conflating the map and the territory.
Hmm. By the way, Claude loves map and the territory, example, or any AI system. So, I would say, so when Louis said, when did this flip happen? I don't think the flip happened in one day, but I think we are living in I really want to write an article, The Curse of David Marr. And I definitely think, David Marr has a lot to do, uh, not necessarily for the flip, but at least to catalyze that flip, and being his position at the MIT, where he was very influential and the whole department has been very influential. I think that department there and David Marr had played a very important role historically in canalizing this computational approach. Uh, but otherwise, adding to what Louis was saying, we have planes, for instance. They fly fast. They fly faster than any birds we know. They mimic the birds' one function, which is flight, much better than any of the birds we know. With more accuracy, fidelity, they can carry people. I don't think any of the birds can carry even a single human being. So that one function we have extracted and we have done amazingly well by making planes, right? But at the same time, if you talk to a fluid mechanics, or an aviation engineer, they won't be talking about birds all the time. As well, if you talk to a bird physiologists, they will not be talking about planes, and they won't be using parts of the plane to describe the bird and to understand bird physiology. uh, it has been more one-sided. It has been biomimetics, and the assumption that it is biomimetics has been very clear from the start, that we are trying to mimic certain biological principles to get a machine to act like this biological organism, which in this case is birds, and the function is flying, right? So very clear delineation between the two. In neuroscience, I think there has not been much thought at the level of individual as well as the level of the enterprise. Every time there's a new technology, that technology, whether or not it has been influenced by neuroscience, the metaphors from the technology keep coming in neuroscience, as if there's kind of a black hole or existential vacuum, that we do not understand the system at all, and whatever we think is legit based on certain apparent similarities, for instance, with neural networks, right? Or now with multiple layers of these networks in artificial systems, supervised, unsupervised learning, for instance, now coming back to visual perception. And it has become like a mess now, where what belongs to neuroscience, what belongs to outside, where is the boundary, and what is the epistemology of neuroscience? I think on an average, as a enterprise, it has been lost.
I think you know, I agree with everything you're saying, but I think when we say neuroscience,
Yeah,
um, that covers so much territory, right?
it does. Yeah.
So we're all complaining about a particular, aspect of, the foundations of cognitive neuroscience and
Hmm.
the computational bias and so on, which I think is very true. But
Yeah.
um, I think there are really cool and interesting things going on in neuroscience, in systems neuroscience and other areas of neuroscience where they're trying. It's obviously a super hard thing to do to work out,
Hmm.
how brains, really along, well, of course, we would say along embodied brains and, and cultural and physical environments really do these things. And I think, what the evidence shows is we see it every day, right? Even in, you know, uh, standard articles online. It's not just about neurons, right? It's about glia, it's about astrocytes,
Hmm.
it's about neurotransmitters, it's about neural synchrony, electrochemical synchrony. It's about all this stuff at multiple scales that you can't reduce to one another, acting in concert in some very clever and sophisticated ways. And that just looks nothing like the, simulation of neuron machines that, Gen AI represents. So I think there's good stuff there in competing voices.
Hmm.
The last thing I'll
Yeah.
say is, as Maduro is suggesting, I'm just going to wrap it. Um, the reason for the, what Louis called the flip is also socioeconomic. It's,
Hmm.
there's so much money and fame and all this stuff on the table that we tend to conflate truth with whoever has the biggest microphone.
I'm glad that only happens in science and not in politics or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I agree that, right, what do we count, what do we mean by neuroscience? And I think, in our conversations, when we say that, I think, usually I think, Madhur, Michael, and I think we know what we're talking about. We're talking about mostly like cognitive neuroscience, mostly,
Hmm.
computational neuroscience. And so in that sense, I agree. You see the kinds of papers that come out, and they seem to be, in Nature Neuroscience or something like that. They seem to be those kinds of neuroscience papers, and they seem to be doing the kinds of things that we are criticizing. I also agree with Michael that there are other areas of neuroscience that I think are really pushing for that more multi-scale, embodied, contextual kind of approaches. So yeah, I'm echoing Michael. Systems neuroscience, for example, some forms of computational neuroscience, but not all of them. And so, but they don't tend. My intuition is that they don't tend to be as popular or as mainstream as the other ones. And I think because there's a sort of social milieu, right, where things just gel together. Oh, economics is focused on AI. Computer science is focused on AI. The neuroscience that talks about AI-like things, that stuff is going to get more popular, and that stuff is going to get more, attention. And then the other ones that are doing different things, to use the term paradigm very loosely, right? Those that are pursuing different paradigms for understanding cognition or biological systems, they don't get as much attention. And I think that's just kind of been, a socioeconomic feature and an advertising feature, which I think is unfortunate because I think truths get lost, but that's not anything unique to this particular moment in history.
I think,
And I think when we
mhm.
go ahead.
I was saying that I agree that, amazing stuff is happening in neuroscience and pushing the boundaries in terms of the way we collect the data, how intrusive we are going in brain and central nervous system, relating it to behavior. It's mind blowing, amazing stuff coming out. I think more than, that stuff not being getting a space, I think the majority problem is that neuroscience is stuck with its interpretation of the data. So the data is valid. Even if you look at data from 80s and 70s, it's still valid as such, There's no problem with the data. And even now we are creating amazing data. The problem is that we have very few ways to interpret that, and somehow everything goes back to computational. One of the prime example is, the work on brain criticality, right? Critical states in the brain or neural avalanches. Really good work from several groups, in the last 2 decades. But now we have very influential, reviews coming out, of which one I rebutted, where they are putting it back in service of computational ideas. So how that, the critical state or, self-organized criticality is a very important function for maximum information transfer, for instance, or the more efficient way of information transfer. So it's kind of a pit where no matter how much you try to come out of it, with various methods, techniques, new kind of data, there's definitely an attraction towards very simplified computational assumption at certain level of interpretation and, hypothesis generation.
I think that, just a side note, and um, I think most of us, when we're complaining about computational neuroscience, we're complaining about the idea that, brains are, doing computations in any non-trivial sense, right?
Uh-huh.
Or clearly false sense. Most of us aren't complaining about using computational methods, right? Or computational analysis, or using that as a tool of science, right? So I just want to say that, you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
that, yeah.
Yeah, we.
So, yeah. So to your point about, the models, the metaphors, I think I've said it before, I think a huge driving force can't get away from this sort of thing is because in science, for the most part, we still think that what it is to explain is to reduce. And that
Mhm.
reduction might take some sort of mereological form or, some part whole kind of form or levels or whatever, or it might be some sort of simplistic intertheoretic unification or whatever. And so as long as you think like that, you're going to be tempted to grasp for simplistic, it's all about predictive processing. It's all about computation, or thermodynamics is the heart of cognition, or whatever, because you've already got it in your head that you're searching for something like that, right?
Mhm.
And so it's got to be something like that. So you just go with whatever tool seems, the best at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I'm glad Madhur mentioned the issue of like data and data interpretation. Um, there was a really interesting paper that came out recently, by Samira F. and colleagues, and I can send it to Madhur if he ends up wanting to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's called bold signal changes can oppose oxygen metabolism
Oh
across
yeah,
the human cortex.
got very
And so
popular.
what they found, yeah, what they found was that, the assumption for the past, 40, 50 years in neuroscience has been that, even if we can't record neural activity directly, what we can record are strong correlative features of that activity. And one driving assumption has been whenever there's more activity, there's more energy use. And so for the brain, it's when there's a spike, there's increased oxygenation and blood flow and things like that. Thus, the inference is when you see more blood flow, you see more activity, neural activity. This paper showed that actually, if we look at it, we find that there's increased neural activity with decreases in blood flow, and that this could be a misinterpretation of the in as much as 40% of the published work on
Hmm.
this. Now, this is I wonder how much this is a data interpretation issue and how much of it is a theory driven issue, right? We had this data. The data is the same, right? We just chose to exclude the data that was showing, increased activity with less blood flows, often treated as artifacts or noise or things like that. But I
Yeah.
just wonder if we didn't go for this more means more
Huh.
activity kind of
Uh,
view, that would have, nipped this issue in the bud right away.
I think this defies both. This is a measurement issue, which precludes both the theory, the data and the theory. Because whenever you measure a system, because we cannot measure anything directly, right? We measure as a proxy with proxy. For instance, with fMRI, the proxy is the bold signal as a proxy of neural activity. So once you have broken the connection, one-to-one correspondence between that proxy and that the neural activity, then we cannot even talk about data versus theory at this point. Uh, at certain level, it makes the whole paradigm invalid. Uh, for a variety of reasons. It's like saying that we discover that EMG right now, for instance, we use EMG activity, sensors, to study muscle activity, or for instance, EKG to study heart activity, and we now discover that EKG has nothing to do with heart, or at least, it can oppose in 40% of the cases or 50% of the cases. Would we ever apply that to a patient? If not, then why are we applying it to science? Uh, and the challenge is that I completely agree, that paper got published. The question is that how many fMRI researchers after that stop their study or reinterpret their data, or they reduced funding for that kind of work. I don't know. It will be interesting for someone to see the influence of that paper in general, or I don't know. It's a big question.
Yeah, I think, just to be fair, neuroscience is really hard for obvious reasons. But I think it's impoverished in terms of, measurement, in terms of tools and interventions, in terms of real-time, large scale, multi-scale. Again, really hard stuff to do. I think it's impoverished theoretically as well. And I also think it's worth saying it's relatively young science.
Hmm.
Um, and this is, I think, one place where philosophers of neuroscience can do some good. Just
I
making
uh
making them less naive about what they're doing, one hopes.
I agree, and I think one of the fields which will benefit more from for in more innovative funding structures would be neuroscience, because when our assumptions are so shaky in neuroscience, concentration of funding is definitely not the right way to go. Instead, more dispersed, more random selection, more number of people, from different fields and with different experiences and approaches is a better idea, given that we don't know what approach is actually even fruitful in the long run.
Yeah, and the problem is that, what we think are good tools or interventions or, whatever are all dependent on our, priors about the right
Huh.
theoretical model and vice versa. So we get stuck very often in certain biases.
Uh-huh.
But just think how hard it is to, like, if you're looking for even if something simplistic and silly that most of us would reject is the right way to go, even if you're just looking for the quote unquote neural correlate of anything,
Hmm.
right? Think how, what counts as necessary? What counts as sufficient? What is merely a background condition? What's confabulating? It's ridiculously hard, right? Even just that, though many of us probably think that's a reasonably silly project, but maybe is worth doing to some degree, but it's still super hard to do.
So is it that our questions have to be, is it that maybe we have to ask questions differently? Because if that's the case, in that sense, if you look at the titles of neuroscience articles, some of the titles sounds very fishy. I mean, yeah, neural correlate or something, but at the same time, all the confabulation, all the causal versus, you know, necessary versus, sufficient, conditions and things like that. So do you think we are asking wrong questions or questions in a wrong way? Like, is does the problem start there, or does the problem start only with the methods or the system being difficult to understand?
Well, I mean, so I'm a philosopher first and foremost, and so questions are my bread and butter. And so I really care about questions. I think they're important, and I think this is part of a tradition of humanity, right? Is asking questions to understand the world. I know that sounds mundane, but that's just the starting point, right? So what kind of questions? Well, there are better questions for different contexts, and I think Aristotle was, helped launch a very helpful way to think about questions, which was different kinds of causation, right? When you're trying to understand a phenomenon, it's not just what caused X, it's what is the thing made of? How do the parts relate? What was it for? Right? These are different kinds of questions that we need to ask. And I think, a little bit of better training in asking questions, I think might be a helpful way. Unfortunately, that kind of knowledge should have started in kindergarten. But it's really hard to do, right? It's really hard to teach kids, to be patient with children. It's much easier to just dump knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Memorize this, spit it out, right? It's much harder to ask questions. And the same thing now, fast forward to a 25-year-old, right, who's, doing their PhD in neuroscience. Do they have time to ask those kinds of questions? Probably not. And nor should they in a lot of cases. I think that's what makes science good, is not worrying about the fundamental questions. But as Michael said, in neuroscience, if it is a young science, that is the time to be asking the questions, right? It's at that fundamental point,
Right.
and the desire to ask questions should never end. Even though physics is taken as like the gold standard for science, that's a place where questions constantly pop up all the time. And so we should be okay, even in new sciences, doing that. Sorry that I got on my soapbox for that,
I,
but
I
yeah.
would like to add there. So you said, like what exactly it is made of, right? How those constituents interact. I think neuroscience has done really good job. When you talk about physiology, for instance, what exactly the brain is made of, what is the central nervous system made of, what are the kind of neural circuits, at least in terms of the physiology, right? How do they interact at a certain level, at least in terms of the biology? I think it has done really amazing work. I think what we are struggling to is the next level where how does it relate? How does it interact at the level of behavior? You know, how does that interaction influence behavior? Or how does behavior influence that interaction? I think that's a bridge at which most of the struggle is concentrated, and that's where sits the cognitive neuroscience, as an enterprise. Uh, and the wider we go in terms of behavior, the bigger is the challenge to bridge this gap.
Yeah, I think
Michael.
we can. Sorry. Um, just to beat up on philosophers for a second, even though I'm praising us as maybe being able to help neuroscience, I believe that. But think about how the game in philosophy is played, right? So, for years it was all just focusing on physics, and you know, we thought physics was the be all and end all, and it was all about laws, and we had debates about the DN model and all that. And then the special science people come along and go, look, all you're making all your assumptions, assuming this is the only science on Earth, and what we really care about in biology is mechanisms or whatever. And then it all just becomes about mechanisms, right?
Hmm.
It's what I'm saying is, we're guilty of this too. There's always some ism, whether it's functionalism or mechanisms or, whatever. There's always some ism, some take that we're, taking up positions on and fighting about. Um, and I don't know that I understand why that's necessary for career building and, it's part of the game, but I'm not sure that's the right way to proceed because as we're suggesting, what is the real story about even the cognitive abilities of, jumping spiders or whatever, let alone humans? It's going to be way more complex than, you know, these simplistic models that people are using.
Yeah. I agree, and I agree with Mador that what I think, as neuroscience shines, it shines in its anatomy, right? Like it's,
Hmm.
what has fMRI and MRI been really great at identifying the anatomy. In my opinion, what has the Connectome project and related projects been good for? Identifying anatomy, right, and the structures of the anatomy, and I think that's amazing. Um, think of the majority of human time, like we couldn't look inside the head without it being a
Yeah.
dead body or destroying the tissue, and that we
Hmm.
can reveal it is amazing.
It is amazing.
But
Yeah.
then, yeah, the further step of now connecting it to
Hmm.
function or purposes or structures, for this or that, that's the very hard work to do. So I don't think any of us questions any of that, like the progress that's been made in anatomy, the wonderful thing, the applications in medicine and things like that. It's the further issues, right?
Hmm.
Where it starts getting to isms, uh, to connect with what Michael's saying. And I think philosophers, theoretically minded scientists like isms, for promotion purposes. Someone gets associated with this ism, but it's also easier to convey things. But my point is not to replicate that kind of philosophy, but to carry the heart of philosophy, which is a love of wisdom and a willingness to
Uh-huh.
question things. You should always be, you should always have in the back of your mind, I could be wrong, and that should be a driving force.
So,
And
yeah, go ahead.
no, I'll just make this quick. And we all know that in science, explanation, understanding, prediction, manipulation, all that stuff can come apart. So it matters what we're looking for and what we value when we're playing these games and what scientists are looking for. So, you know, take something like addiction. I think most of us, whatever, brain, disease theory of addiction you might think you have, I think most of us think addiction's a biopsychosocial phenomena. But, if you say to me, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of money to solve addiction, and I don't care about any ethical constraints or getting at the deep truths of addiction. Just figure out, how to get people to stop smoking crack or whatever. Then yeah, what am I going to do? I'll start knocking stuff out in the brain, find some area to lesion where every time they see a crack pipe, they get sick, you know? I mean, that might be a clever intervention, but that doesn't necessarily tell you much about reality.
That's definitely true. I mean, I would say that, I mean, I agree with everything you have said, and really, in terms of uh, anatomy and physiology, neuroscience has done wonders, over the last decades. But I also feel I will retaliate a little bit about the role of philosophers, for instance. I completely am on board with you of having philosophers having a major role to play in neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience in general. But at the same time, you have philosophers who have done a lot of disservice, like so we are living in a world where the more bullshit you can produce, right? At some point, it does not depend on what is truth and how rigorous it is. If you can produce more bullshit, the world looks like that bullshit. It happens. So you have certain theories like predictive processing, for instance, right? You can wrap up any damn thing in predictive processing, and if you're prolific enough and you have like 10 collaborators who can push out 20 articles a year, in 10 years, you have published like 2,000 articles on predictive processing. And now people who understand or do not understand predictive processing, no matter what, right? Roboticists to bloody, whatever, you can explain almost any damn thing. Just like what happened to mirror neurons at a very small level, but now predictive processing is almost, omnipresent. Uh, so now what to do then? Because yes, philosophers have to play a role. But if you have, let's say, 10 philosophers who are so good with writing and they publish, each a book a year and 20 papers a year, then we are just flooded with the theory. And that theory seems to be the true theory given how predominant it is, how many citations it gets. the career incentives that are associated with that. And for a graduate student who is gullible, who cannot yet think what is good or what is bad in terms of science, you have this theory which a lot of big people seem to endorse. So, so now I think that is the state of cognitive neuroscience in some ways. And if you
Yeah,
try, yeah,
I
go ahead.
totally I think philosophers in every way are a double-edged sword.
Uh-huh.
They can do great harm and they can do great good. So,
Yeah.
just another example. I'm not the only one to have this critique. It's been around for years, but another area I publish in, quantum mechanics or interpretations of quantum mechanics.
Uh-huh.
Um, Philosophers, I think, did great work in getting physicists to be more sophisticated and help them work out and generate other possible models of quantum mechanics. A crazy situation, right, where the most predictive theory on Earth, and there's still no consensus about the right physical or metaphysical model, which is certainly not the sort of thing one would like to see happen to brains or the study of brains. But so I think they were useful in some ways, but then, you know, it became just another metaphysical interpretation game, right?
Mm.
And so what happened is the quantum information theory and other people came along, to make a long story short, and said, maybe we should worry more about making empirical advancements or, scientific advancements and, not just endless, metaphysical speculation. So I think we can help and we can hurt.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I want to go back to Madur's point about like publishing and having these like, people have these labs, they have like 10 postdocs and 50 grad students, and then they have collaborators, and they're able to just, flood the market with papers. And I think, to bring it back to AI, I think we're seeing that with AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think, hot take, I think it's more nefarious with AI publications, and it rests on one key point for me. I'm open to there being more. I'm also open to being wrong. But the way I view it is that there is a flood of papers showing, what AI can do, what these models can do, how they are improving over time, and this and that. And where do we find them often? In preprint websites, so archive and things like that, where they haven't gone through peer review. And these papers never go through peer review most of the time. And you'll find that, these like 500 authored papers, they get cited, 10,000 times in 2 years. And that hasn't been vetted by, a peer group, right? Which is what peer review is supposed to be. I'm not saying peer review is perfect. It's very flawed. There's a lot of problems with it, but it is at least one
Mm-hmm.
hurdle that you have to get by in the production of knowledge. And to connect again with what Mador said, the public and students at large, they don't really see that difference. They see it published on a website, and it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's archive or nature, they
Uh-huh.
treat it as the same. And you see this in the media as well. I would like to say that, at least to give the media credit, they're starting to use the word or the
Mm.
phrase preprint sometimes.
So,
But I think this is a problem that I see more with the AI literature. I don't know what you guys think about
so
that.
Louis,
I'm
I would
curious.
like to add a little bit there. So the fact that predictive processing and stupid junk neuroscience with predictive processing interpretation has been published in Nature Neuroscience and Neuron now across the board, without any data sometimes, with just some jargon nonsense. That tells me that editorial hijack is like complete now from the predictive processing perspective. It's like the snake has already eaten its tail scenario. So that's an argument that peer review is not working. Okay, that's an argument when it comes to the context of neuroscience, that peer review is not working at least to a level which we need it to work. Because otherwise, there's no way it could have been contaminated by this nonsense. But at the same time, if I say that peer review should be not be there, in that case, I should be willing to take drugs which have not been approved using clinical trials, right? I should be living by the same standard I apply for, for stuff. So I think that peer review, we have weak peer review in science. We do not have any strong peer review, or because once you are influential enough, peer review is a formality. Especially in top journals where there's no scientists but failed PhD students who could not continue doing science now become the editors of those journals. Sorry to be blunt about it, but that's how these journals operate. and then they come to decide, what gets published. It's very easy to hijack that system, especially when you are at an influential institution and influential position. So it is not working at that level in science, but we do not have a better option, So that's that. When it comes to preprint and AI, I think AI people have a legit concern that peer review is too slow and the developments of AI is too fast that they cannot wait for peer review. And even if you look at models which are working properly, they were published in, for instance, the paper, uh, attention is all you need, for instance, one of the most famous papers in artificial intelligence, has not been, published in a journal. It's still the archive is being cited again and again, like more than 10,000 citations by now. So I don't know how much of it we can argue, given that it's logistically impossible to peer review AI literature, the rate, the rate at which development is happening. And at the same time, we cannot defend it. We are not in a position to defend that peer review because in the top tier journals, we have junk being published more regularly than ever before. That's my take on it.
Yeah,
Well,
just real quick, just one quick statement. So I agree with much of what you said, Madhur. The point, and I know you're not defending per se, you're just
Uh,
kind of presenting a certain point, but the point about that people in AI would say, well, the developments are happening too fast and peer review is too slow. My response is, so what? Like, go slow, right? If not, then you're just doing product development and you're competing with product development. And that's a whole other, that's not science, right? Science does go slow because it should be careful. And there's things that go, great claims require, great evidence or, something like that. And, we're not seeing that. And it's the reason is because it's too slow, because my competitors might get a product out or something. Well, then just the whole system of knowledge just starts disintegrating.
so in a
But
way, it is a product development. If you actually look at it in a way, it is product development. Like if you look at the total number of AI models which exist, about 100,000 right now, or close to 100,000 LLM models. I have a friend who is basically doing the analysis on that, from the cybersecurity perspective. When you listen to him, he describes that those models can be condensed into like a very few number of factors, and there are thousands and thousands of models which are just iterations or minor improvements or some parametric changes over those models. So even if you see that flood of, preprints, they're not very different from each other. So it is product development, to be honest.
yeah, I think it's one thing to complain about problems inside, academia, right? And there are obviously tons of problems about peer review and all kinds of other stuff. Um, but then it's another thing to talk about, industry or tech bros or corporate America. So I think Maduro, this is part of your point. Like, they don't care about pure science or knowledge
No,
or whatever. They
no,
just care about money. So, and to the extent that they can drive, scientific investigation or subsume it or, own it or whatever, they will. So, they're not interested in the deep nature of human cognition.
no. It's the whole idea is to be able to fly at a speed. So the question now is that do we need birds or not, right? But the assumption that because we have been able to fly now we do not need birds is kind of it's a stupid question because bird have a role in the ecosystem. If there is no ecosystem, humans won't survive and there won't be people to fly. So those are very two different. I mean, I don't know where to go with it, but this is I think, Michael, to your point, those are two different things, two different questions, which is being conflicted around in society right now.
And this is, what are we, this conversation is, right, science and values 101,
Uh,
all these extra scientific profoundly, but these days, super profoundly, and especially with things like AI that involve money. I think this is one reason why some of this, certainly the three of us, can't resist getting on our high horse about this because there's plenty of things that we debate that have no profound effect on society, but this stuff, conning people into believing that, this stuff is intelligent or that brains are like this or that you should trust this stuff, that really matters to our culture.
I have been very vocal proponent of artificial intelligence adoption in my lab, in at the university in general, about everything as a tool. I think it's a great tool. I think it's a great assistive technology. We
I
should be
agree.
part of it. Why not? But at the same time, the false equalization between neuroscience or human brain and LLMs now, which I would have also assumed from the technology people side who do not understand neuroscience or cognition, would have made a little sense. But the fact that similarities are being driven now from within the neuroscientific community is a little disappointing, and it seems like why? Because it's a disservice to the both epistemologically as well as practically to itself.
It's a great tool, but even as a tool, I think it's grossly overhyped. I mean, it's been a long time since I had to write code, I'll admit, but when I talk to people who are, really wizards at it, and I ask them about, to what degree does, Gen AI, can it really replace a great programmer, blah, blah, blah. Never have I've never, even though I've seen this hype in articles, in news stories or whatever, none of them have ever said yes. They're like, it's a really great tool, but it's ridiculous to think that, replaces a really good programmer. And I think that when you look at almost any place, right. I would have to go into great detail to make good on this, but I think when you look at the claims like, Gen AI has discovered all these new protein structures, or Gen AI has worked out this math problem, or whatever. When you really dig in the details, what you find out is, guess what? Gen AI can look at, first of all, it can look at everything out there that is, online in some way and go, look, some mathematician in, 1844 already worked this out, or look, I looked at everything every mathematician said, and here's a possibility. Or, look, I generated every physically possible protein, configuration that might exist, because these other people had already done the work. It's always a statistical trick that piggybacks on what humans have already done.
Michael, I was laughing a little bit right now when you were talking about this very real claim, and I think it would be very easy to find. You just Google it; it'll happen real like immediately. Gen AI found these protein structures, or Gen AI, unraveled this, and it would have taken a team of 100 humans 3,000 years to do it, or something.
Yeah.
The weird thing is like the anthropomorphizing of the Gen AI system, right? So they'll say like, I don't know, I'm just off something, Claude found this or whatever. We, we don't see that in other sciences, right? So nobody said that the Large Hadron Collider found the Higgs boson, right?
Right.
It was the team that used that tool that found the Higgs boson, right? But we don't, but that doesn't, so it's just very strange that then we
So,
say, oh, uh, ChatGPT solves this problem. No,
so
it didn't.
Yeah.
So, so Louis, I can't stop laughing at that because when people make this comparison, right? Like for instance, Gen Z is having, relationships with AI, and AI is talking people into commit suicide and all that. And I always wonder, like, that's because a lot of human relationships are like just texting and nothing else, right? And a lot of those text messages actually are depressive, and then you commit suicide. So if even along those dimensions, we are just seeing statistical similarities, and we are both willing to make AI godlike or a monster like, with the same statistical, because it's hard to think uh, pragmatically about statistics, right? Statistics, it takes a lot of effort. I mean, we know how deceptive statistics can be, and I think the surface level similarity is doing exactly the same thing to the discourse of capability versus the map versus territory argument. Like, what exactly is the map in AI and what exactly is the territory? And then as soon as you have the map and territory, defending the map is basically, an act of fool. You have to defend the territory and not defend the map, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Louis is suggesting, yeah, look, it's amazing to have a piece of technology that can show you every possible, protein, topological structure, whatever, but it's useless without smart humans to think about how that applies to real biology and, actual problems.
But what if, like somebody argues with us right now, like, we are just making up straw man arguments, like we are just creating these straw mans. Because nobody is saying that AI will completely replace humans, or there will not be any, a scientist interpreting the protein structure. Uh, so what would you say to them? Because whenever I have criticized, any neuroscientific theory in any of the papers, at least one reviewer has got back saying that that's a moot point. Nobody believes in it. Nobody believes that brain is a computer. Nobody believes that brain is a Bayesian machine, even though every damn article says that. So how do you respond to that claim?
I mean, I'll let Louis speak, but I mean, between us, we can generate a buttload of quotes to the contrary, right? I mean, people say this stuff all the time. People in academia and, people not, I can give you many, so my response is, I'll show you the quotes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I agree. Right, the proof is in the pudding, as they say, and there's a lot of evidence for this, and it's across the board, right? So it's like, if you're a new student to this, and you're like, wow, it's doing that, all the way up through like a senior faculty member. I've seen these claims, I've seen it in print, I've seen it in a peer-reviewed, journal, I've seen it on preprints, I've seen it in the media. Like it's so overwhelming, and it kind of reminds me of a number of years ago in the philosophy literature there was a big debate about whether all explanations are mechanistic explanations, and if you criticized it, um, and you would say, well, here's a phenomenon that doesn't is not susceptible to what you think is necessary for a mechanistic explanation, and then you would get responses in the reviews that would say, well, nobody thinks this, nobody thinks that, even if you provide quotes. It's almost like a weird kind of mass amnesia or something like that. Like it's very strange, but it's also very psychologically self-protected, right? Like you don't want to think that, you spent all this time and effort and work doing something that is at worst totally false, but minimally is not quite as impressive or exciting as maybe you would like it to be. So I people who communicate it. So it's all just a very strange phenomenon to me.
I don't remember where it was, but Louis and I were at some conference with, which the usual suspects, a bunch of cognitive neuroscience people and philosophers. And we were complaining about the naive, acceptance of computational and representational theories in neuroscience. And this cognitive neuroscientist was like, oh, no, no, we don't believe anything like that. And 2 seconds later, she was talking about, so I wonder if the brain is running this algorithm or that algorithm. And I'm like, that's, you know, hey,
They keep moving goalposts, like
yeah.
they keep moving goalposts. So it's so interesting, like sometimes I wonder, do they actually believe in this, or they think that this is a game which we are playing? Is it an academic game, or is it an academic curiosity, it's hard to differentiate.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want to make clear that like we shouldn't. I'm not saying any of us are doing this, but we shouldn't shame people who change their mind, right? Like science is iterative.
Yeah.
I modify my views all the time, like based on new evidence and new
So,
findings and things like that. And so, to say that, oh no, I did say that in that paper and I was wrong, I'm modifying it.
uh-huh.
I don't really see that much, right? You're not going to see. I would be shocked if Carl Friston ever came out and said that he was wrong about the free energy principle. No, there's so people are just so
Uh,
entrenched
I think
in
he
these
won't come
views.
out. He won't come out because he will have to return millions to Saudi investors. But you know, but I know, at least he has been sending mails to my department, by the way, to get me fired.
And we,
Yeah,
like, we want to be careful not to commit ad hominem, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
leaving aside whatever people's motives are,
Uh-huh.
our point is, show me, we don't think, predictive processing, free energy principle are well supported by the facts, right? leaving aside whatever the person's motive is. But I totally agree with Louis that I think I whined about this last time. There's not a good incentive structure for changing your mind in philosophy or science, right? So,
There is
um,
none.
it's no matter, so many, dare we, I won't use the word pseudoscience, but there are so many accounts of consciousness that are, for which they have found counterexample, neural
Yeah.
correlates, functional accounts, whatever, and they find counterexamples or whatever. I can't think of any case where, you know what, I was wrong. I'm going to move
So,
on because that's just not how this game is played, right? And
no,
then, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Please complete.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is like, um, in philosophy as well. So like we started out, people were defending same thing with mechanism, right? It's about localization and decomposition. And it's
Uh-huh.
all about that. And then there were tons of papers, like Louis said. And then you come along and you go, no, it's really not like that. Well, what did the mechanists do? They just changed the definition, right? Oh
Uh-huh.
yeah, mechanisms can be highly distributed and multi-scale and blah blah blah. And computation. All right,
Uh-huh.
okay, it's not Turing, it's not digital, it's analog, it's physical, it's biological. They just take the word, right, and totally alter the concept, but stick to the flag.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. No, so this is so when it comes to being wrong, so if you think of the modern science, it's kind of based on Popperian falsifiability, right? Falsifiability, at least I was raised as a scientist as a Popperian staunch with a staunch stance on falsifiability. Now I understand that the way we design experiments, a lot of times, Popper is not at the heart of falsifiability in the design, but ultimately our statistics is doing the same thing, even though a lot of times we are falsifying the null hypothesis, right? And the idea is that as soon as you have an exception, you need to explain that exception or you need to modify the theory, right? Every evidence which is contrary to your hypothesis has to have some bearing on the hypothesis in certain way, right? So in that sense, we cannot have four different theories of motor control or five different theories of cognition and 10 different theories of consciousness, right? There has to be a paradigm which can falsify one or many of them at the same time, and you have to choose the one which you cannot falsify and compare it with those, find a paradigm where you can compare it with a different. That has been assumption. So I completely agree with you that none of these theories have ever been falsified. And none of these theories have ever been dropped because there's no incentive structure in academia to come out, clean or to have a rehab, a theoretical rehab. So I don't think that's because we shame people or the community shames. I think it's more that there's a lot more return. The way citations work, the way the literature growth works, and the way you produce the pyramid model of, your academic clones in the lab, traditionally speaking. I think that whole socioeconomic system of academia does not incentivize coming out clean, rather than community shaming. And I think that's where we can have prizes, for people to get rewarded probably who, like a tenured professor comes out that everything which I've done has been wrong. And instead of, taking away the tenure or denying the tenure, we give them, $1 million grant to work further on the correct interpretation or the correction. I think it will be a service to science. On that note, I would like to have, I was doing my master's project in South India, and I heard about this guy in Kerala. Kerala is a state where it is more, most people actually have more sympathy towards Marxist philosophy than capitalist philosophy. And there was this old guy, almost like close to 80, who was a staunch Marxist in his life, and his brain changed and he realized that he has been deceived, and he started buying the capitalist principles, and he was so mad about himself and his life lost that he committed suicide because he could not bear the pain of coming out as capitalist.
Well,
Yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow to
Yeah.
change your mind, especially, like every year that goes by that you believe something or that you're known for something and just adds and makes it even more difficult. Yeah, I agree.
well, I love the idea, Madur, of, a large cash prize for changing your mind. Maybe that would maybe that would help.
Yeah. I think so. It's definitely in the spirit of science, at the very least.
So, we've talked about philosophers mostly in a positive light, but there's a paper that just came out this week in Nature, um, and it's written by what I think are four philosophers. I think they all have interdisciplinary kind of components in other departments as well, but they are philosophers. The paper is called "Does AI Already Have Human Level Intelligence? The Evidence is Clear."
Wow.
And
Wow.
the clear evidence, I can put it in the chat for you
Oh,
guys.
I think it is,
So
yeah.
they say things like, um, we think, this is a quote, we think the current evidence is clear. By inference to the best explanation, the same reasoning we use in attributing general intelligence to other people, we are observing AGI, or artificial general intelligence, of a high degree. So they're making a claim that we are already at AGI. Um, will it improve? Will it become more AGI-y? Yeah, because they think there are certain things it's not doing. But overall, they think that they use the term a cascade of evidence. They think
Uh-huh.
there's been a cascade of evidence that we have AGI, and I I just don't find the claims compelling. And so here are some of the reasons. So they said that, they're not saying that general intelligence has to be perfect or universal intelligence. Um, and I think that's right because that would be a standard that we don't hold for humans, right? Humans aren't perfect and humans aren't general intelligence machines. Alison Gopnik, the developmental psychologist, has said AGI, there is no human AGI or human general intelligence. Like some people, play piano, other people have, skills at math. Some people can carve wood and another person can do ballet, right? But you can't do them all. There's a lot of things that every person can do. So that's not a standard to hold AGI to. And I think that's fine. But what I think about what the reasons that they give for thinking that we have AGI, so they say that we've passed the Turing test, which I think is probably true.
Yeah.
Um, but I think we have to contextualize what Turing was doing at the time. So, and I think most sober-minded people would probably say that's not really, people don't talk about the Turing test anymore because that's been passed, I think, for a long time, actually. The ability to have a conversation and make someone, a human being, think that they're talking with another human being. The other example they give is that there's expert level performance
Hmm.
on these tasks, such as you know, passing PhD exams or things like that. And I don't know why we would think that's reflective of AGI. I mean, Watson. So this is starting to date me. Watson from IBM was this, artificial intelligence system that became famous because it was on Jeopardy and it
Hmm.
was winning Jeopardy. And I don't know why anybody was impressed by that. If I had the storage capabilities of Watson, I'd be able to access information about anything as well. And so there's this, this tension between what is the performance? Are we just measuring and comparing performance, or is it how the performance was produced? And I think it's behavioristic, right? It's what is the output that matters? Because you give me a PhD level exam, which I've done, and then I pass it. I did it with my just what was inside my skull and body, right? This system that passed that same test is connected to tens of thousands of servers, is consuming exponentially more energy than I am.
Uh-huh.
And yet we have to say that they're equivalent. Equivalent in what sense? Output, maybe, but it's not just about the output. And if it is about the output, then why did we give up on behaviorism and things like that, right? So, yeah,
Should should we
I know you guys
redefine
haven't had a
intelligence?
chance. You guys
I
probably
would,
haven't had a chance to read the article before, but what I'm curious what you think.
I
I
mean,
would,
yes, sorry,
go
go ahead.
ahead. Um, so the only place I would push back is, letting him off the hook with AGI. which, they, as you just pointed out, they allege is the goal because, yeah, not everybody can fly fighter jets and be a ballerina, right? I don't think that's really the point. The point is, humans and certain other non-human animals are, you know, more adaptive overall than others can master, when required more skills and do a wider variety of cognitive tasks and so on. So I think that's, a legitimate property, that it is crazy to think that, you know, that's what we're looking at. I mean, that was my point about the Turing test in the beginning, right? Is, what are we learning? We're learning that was, a crappy test for AGI, right? Because, and the same thing is true of chess and Go and all these other things. It's very, congratulations. Very clever that you made a machine using other methods that can do this stuff. That's great. And I'm sure that, but uh, that's not AGI. It's still weak AI, right? And, it can't do it without piggybacking on what humans have done, etc.
If you actually look at what AI is, it is so these models are constant, right? Like once you train a particular model on a data with a
Right.
certain parameter, you might have a billion parameter model, a 10 million parameter model, trillion parameter model. These models are constant, right? These are basically a collection of weights, right? And they take in an input and they parse that input in certain way. And then, it interacts with the weights. And depending on a context, it creates an output, right? So ultimately, it's just a structure. You send in something, it gets reflected, it gets filtered, right? It comes out of it, right? I mean, you can think of any filtering machine. I mean, in this case, the parameters are number of so high. But if you actually look at how we filter different liquids, for instance, through chromatograph, right? Uh, Ultimately, it just has more number of parameters, but it's exactly doing the same thing. It is a set of filter. The challenge is that we are not able to yet identify what filter it is and characterize that filter along certain dimensions, right? So the mystery remains. But if you understand those, then the output will become very predictable. The more we understand the model and the stats of the model, the more predictable for us we will be able to see what input goes out in and what output comes out, and with what amount of stochasticity, right? So we have created these filters basically, right? And we are calling that intelligence. It's in the name, in artificial intelligence, right? We never started with artificial writer or artificial, literary geek, or we started with the word intelligence. So I think we generally have a mistake of equating this filter with anything, because at the end of the day, it's just a filter. Something goes out, something comes out, something goes in, something comes out. It has a structure. That structure is very useful. That structure is tied to the human language. It's tied to the statistics of human language. It ties to the structure of knowledge that we have produced and kept in books and online. So it definitely captures at different levels. And I think that's all about it. And that's amazing. That's like, I mean, that's one of the best things probably we have produced. And that's all it is as well. So I think there's a problem that most people are not seeing what is behind in terms of what it is, because it's very easy to think of these systems in a label, and then attribute everything that label comes with, to that particular system. Uh, just like I gave the example of a plane. A plane can do a lot more, and there's no bird which can compete with a plane. But at the end of the day, a plane is basically a engine. The bigger engine you make, the more uh, thrust you can produce, the faster you can fly. The more you can change, the more you can navigate. But it is not a bird. Uh,
Yeah, and just to emphasize your point,
yeah,
once that filter, as you called it, is fully baked, it's done,
it's
right?
done. Yeah,
And that's the point I'm making about, like, lobsters and squirrels can do better than that.
yeah. Along the dimensions, they can even cockroaches do better than that. Uh, in different directions.
Can I know I'm not hosting, but can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Was
So,
that the
eh,
question?
can I ask two questions? That one and then the next one.
Uh-huh.
And I'll answer first to get the ball going. So, what do we think Gen AI is missing to get to AGI or to be anything like us? Like what we keep saying, well, it's clear that it's not like us, and saying things like that. And my starting answer would be what I think of as intelligence um, is to care, right? You care about, you have interest. You care about getting nutrients, or you care about solving this problem. And I think intelligence, general intelligence of the kind that humans and living organisms have, is deeply tied with that interest and that care. In that article that I referenced earlier that says that we've achieved AGI, among critiques that they try to address that might be closest to what I just said is they said, some might say that a system requires agency in order to have
Uh-huh.
intelligence. And they said, no, we can pull those apart, agency and intelligence. And what I think we can pull apart is agency and information processing and problem solving. But if we mean general intelligence like biological organisms have, then I don't think we can really separate those two insofar as agency is tied to caring and interest and choice. So that would be one main thing that I think these systems are missing.
I think that as soon as you bring in any attribute of an organism beyond its existence, right? So beyond existence, an organism can be defined in terms of a function, right? Or an activity or a behavior. That can be replicated in some or the other way, can be mimicked in an artificial system. So, for instance, bird can maneuver. Yeah, you can create a plane that can maneuver in certain ways, right? Fly certain ways. But bird exists, but a plane cannot exist in the bird's way of existence. I think it goes back to, what does it feel to be a bat? I think that was the book, right? Or on bad consciousness, right? Uh, so I think as soon as we operationalize any human attribute, for instance, agency, there are ways to make any LLM or a robot to have that agency, in certain ways. Then we can argue over, the qualitative aspects of that agency, break that down into, different things. By the same time, we can replicate at least the manifestation of that. I think other than reproduction, probably, which I don't, maybe there are robots or there will be robots, who can actually create new robots, maybe in different ways of fertilization, probably not sexual fertilization, but some other ways of constructing copies of themselves. Because we have organisms that reproduce in multiple ways, right? Vegetative growths, and we have, asexual reproduction and things like that. So even that way, we cannot. That will also not be a irrefutable. So this is my understanding. As soon as you operationalize any trait of a organism beyond its existence, it can be replicated, if not now at some level. And then the question is that life, right? So so I think we are going back. At some point, we'll remain with only one question, which is what is life? And I think rest of the equivalents would be drawn.
Yeah, um to answer your question, I would say it's missing pretty much everything. So even if we just stick to the hardware, quote unquote, brains, um, even the relatively simple brains of certain animals and insects, the multi-scale complexity and the other stuff that's going on there, it doesn't have that. It's a cheesy simulation of neural networks. And I think we would all agree about this. How is this trick done by us and other animals? Being embodied, having sensory, apparatus, being able to learn, move around the world in various ways, um, having multiple sensory modalities, the physical environment, the context matters a great deal, especially when you start talking about animals like us, where a lot of it is biopsychosocial, right? So culture, all that sort of stuff. And my answer, of course, is very annoying to these people because it flies in the face of their assumption that explanation to be explanation has to be reductive in some way, right? So um, otherwise, they would say you're invoking the phenomena that we meant to explain. So we don't even agree. Again, I said this before about these kinds of debates. There's no agreement about the explanans and explanandum. And the other thing that I'm curious about it, think about like 4E persons versus, brain-centric people. And the other thing I'm curious about is, you know, do we, when we get in these talk about these debates, these discussions, are we having any factual disagreements with anybody? Like, if we sit down and say, let's talk about how this technology works, let's talk about how this trick is done and what it can actually accomplish. If there's no real factual disagreement there, what's left to disagree about? Just how we're going to define words like understanding, perception, thinking, cognition, right? Is that, that really does harken back, I think, to, as Louis said and you suggested.
Yeah. Uh, One thing I wanted to, you guys have given some really interesting responses to my question. One I want to focus on right now is the embodiment issue. So that article that I keep going back to, the recent Nature one, authored by philosophers, when they go through the critiques of certain systems like LLMs and things like that as not being AGI or not being intelligent. One of the critiques they point out is, quote unquote, they don't have bodies. And their reply, I think, is interesting. So they said, without embodiment, critics argue there can be no general intelligence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last sentences are, quote, physicist Stephen Hawking interacted with the world almost entirely through text and synthesized speech. Yet his physical limitations in no way diminished his intelligence. Period. Motor capabilities are separable from general intelligence. Um, Michael, what do you brought up 4E and embodiment? And I think you've written a paper or two about that. What would you say to that?
I mean, uh, rest in peace, Stephen Hawking. But oh my God, where do you start with this? So the implication is supposed to be something like, hey, Stephen Hawking, and we can come up with other examples where really smart people are basically like brains in a vat, and so we're right because really what matters is just that you're the right kind of brain, and the vat doesn't matter. And I mean, it's silly in so many ways, right? I mean, Stephen Hawking, first of all, was ambulatory for a large part of his life. Has, sensory modalities, was ambulatory and can move around afterwards, though with great effort, of course. And there's every other animal and every other person on Earth, and no real good examples of, real brains and vats that, do the amazing things we're interested in without any kind of body or connections to their wider environment.
The other argument to add on that is that what is the speech or text about? I mean, it is embodying the constraints of our vocal tract, right? The grammar is not coming, and the language is not coming out of without this constraints on how we can produce these sounds, right? So, to AI to exist or to LLMs to exist in a world where humans don't exist or this vocal tract doesn't exist at all, do they even like what would it look like? Maybe the silicon will just come together with silicon and fuse and produce like a bigger silicon chip. Like the intelligence is it comes out of basically this asymmetry. This reduction in entropy, basically the increase in entropy, basically, right? It's that intelligence is needed to maintain that increase of entropy, right? Of from a thermodynamical perspective, right? Of life forms, right? And generally speaking, the more intelligent you are, the more resources you accumulate, or the more uh, you know ecosystem you influence around you, right? Because ultimately, intelligence is driven by adaptation and your ability to reproduce, your ability to gather resources, your ability to accumulate resources, right? Or to influence other organisms, howsoever you put it, right? So it is to maintain that higher entropy state. what does has silicon has to do with that, right? It just comes together, fuse, and just goes away and remains silicon. So I don't know where I'm going with it, but it's just hubris, and it's hard to say why it is hubris, but it is hubris.
Yeah, I mean, in biological animals, intelligence is bound up with values, goals, desires, you know, and you can't separate those things out, at evolutionary timescales and, at shorter timescales. And these people are alleging that you can, and they can build a, you know, Gen AI brain in a vat, that can do all the same stuff. So show me, you know. If they do it, I will kiss the ring. But I don't see anything at this moment that gives any of us a reason to believe it.
Mhm.
I would
Yeah,
say, yeah, go ahead.
just caring, that was one of my litmus tests, and I think what I picked up a bit from Michael Medor is what organisms do in the world, their caring, their desiring, things like that. What's interesting to tie it back to Mar and its three levels, which Madhur pointed out earlier might be, a source of some of these conceptual confusions. So Mar had these three levels. One was, what's the computational level? And I'm going to put that in quotes because it wasn't computation as in like necessarily Turing computation. It just meant what was the problem that needed to be solved. So think of like a chimp using a rock to open a nut. That could be a computational problem. Then there was the representation and algorithm, which is how do we define that in certain steps. Then there was the implementation level, which is, how is the system organized to do it? Is it like neurons? Is it silicon chips, et cetera? And that's what we think of as these three levels, Mars levels, and it's had a huge influence on the cognitive sciences, writ large. But what I think it's forgotten is that Mar developed these levels approach with his colleague Tommaso Poggio, and when they first promoted these levels, there was four levels. So Poggio really stressed that learning, deeply tied to like natural selection and evolution and things like that, needs to be another level.
Mhm.
Right? There's this saying that nothing in biology makes sense outside of natural selection. Right. And so I think he took that to heart and put that as a level of those in the context of what organisms do in the world and how they learn and evolve and adapt. And that has gone away completely. And I think conveniently for current, proponents of Gen AI to lean on, the kind of Marian levels, the three levels, I think they are conveniently leaving out that fourth level, which most people do, unless you care about biology and things like that. But yeah, so I'm curious, like, have you ever come across the, Poggio's fourth level? Do you think that makes any difference to that kind of Marian view of intelligence?
I
My
think,
answer is
yeah.
no. I have not come across it, so I have to think about it.
Yeah, I haven't come across that either. I mean, I know Tinbergen's four level, of the structure function and both in evolutionary terms and development terms. That kind of makes sense, and I think that would have been a much better premise from neuroscience as well, the ethological premise compared to the Marian, adoption. That's the reason I say that we are living with the curse of Mar in cognitive neuroscience. In fact, started writing an essay on it, which I haven't published yet. But I think getting rid of Mars three level might be a service for neuroscience moving forward. We know what we have already done so much with it. But with regarding this essay, Luis, I think the last paragraph of this essay is pretty interesting. So it reads like this: Nicholas Copernicus displaced humans from the center of the cosmos. Darwin displaced humans from a privileged place in nature. Turing suggested that humans might not embody the only way to be intelligent. The machines Turing envisioned 75 years ago have finally arrived in a form both more alien and more human than anyone imagined. Like those earlier revolutions, this one invites us to rethink our standing and accept that there are more kinds of minds than we had previously entertained. Our place in the world and our understanding of minds will not be the same. Which I also feel another level of hubris because the melodrama which comes with this, parallelism between human minds and LLMs. When blue collar workers were displaced, we did not have this kind of melodrama at that point, when machines were taking away the blue collar job. So I feel a lot of this is like we thought that white collar work is more, sanguine or something more special and it cannot be displaced. I think it's a lot more socioeconomic that this kind of hubris, is become a part of narrative than actual understanding of, what exactly it is displacing or even it is displacing at all.
I just want to say I'm not a biological chauvinist, right? Like nothing I'm saying is based on the idea that only, entities made out of certain kind of stuff could have intelligence or consciousness. So for me, that's just a straw man, a red herring, whatever. Sure, you can build, I'm sure you can make other intelligent, conscious things out of different stuff, but, they have different stuff, but they don't have the other right properties.
Uh-huh.
You know, this paragraph that you wrote or that you read, Medora, is very interesting. I think we tend to privilege our point in history, and like we get really excited that the world is changing. Um, and we look back and we say like, oh, look what Copernicus did, and then look what Darwin did, and then look what Turing did. And we're in the midst of this revolution of what minds are, what they could be. And I'm not quite, yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen the evidence that it is that radical of a move. It seems to be an iterative move, if anything, instead of this huge revolution. But yeah, it takes time to really think about the impact that these things had. So I think history is important. Um, but moving, predicting like how people will receive it, and then moving forward with these findings. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's just throwing darts in the dark, right? And hoping that maybe your claim was right, and like, hey, look what all this LLM stuff is doing. I think we're on to something pretty amazing. But I think upon retrospect, I find that very unlikely.
Any
I agree.
comments, Michael?
Oh, I completely agree. The one thing I would say to go back a step, where I might lose the both of you on this one, but once you throw in, the necessity of caring and value and all that sort of stuff, I think you have to start to question the idea that you can separate intelligence from experience, from consciousness. I'm deeply skeptical of the idea that you could build something with AGI or common sense that, is a philosophical zombie. And that is also one of the assumptions that, AI
Hmm.
in general is making.
On that note, Michael, I predicted that, as soon as we will have tools like LLMs, we will have an inflation and epidemic of theories of consciousness. And if you read the literature now, every
Yeah.
Tom, Dick, and Harry has a theory of consciousness, and preprints are coming out of a new theories of consciousness.
Well, in some sense, we already do, right? Because they're, not quite as, in the way that you're suggesting, but we have predictive processing theories of consciousness, right?
Yeah, we
Um,
have.
and 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 they make no, first of all, obviously it can't possibly answer the hard problem because the hard problem is cooked up so that nothing could. So that's
Uh-huh.
not a shocker, but it doesn't explain why we have the specific phenomenological experiences that we do, right? So why couldn't a machine that does predictive process, why does it have to have experiences at all, right?
Yeah.
And B, why would it have the specific ones that it has, right? As opposed to some others. So, yeah, I agree.
So, Michael, let me push back a little bit from the other side and say, what makes you think these systems don't have experience of some kind?
Hmm. Well, in all fairness to Gen AI, I have never, dated one or gotten into a really personal relationship. So, is uh, you know, what can it do? Like, okay, sure. Um, it doesn't have the same hardware I do, so that's one reason to doubt it, including the neurochemistry associated with certain, conscious states. You do when making these inferences, you do have to rely on behavior, and you have to make these inductive inferences. I don't know I could be wrong. Maybe you guys are, zombies, and I'm making inferences based on your behavior. But if so, I have a bunch of behavior in a lot of different areas to make that inference based on. What do I have here that, it can pass the Turing test, right? And it can do, look through vast amounts of data and make statistical inferences. So there's no reason to believe it. It doesn't have any of the things conscious beings on Earth have, right? Embodied brains or nervous systems exhibiting certain kinds of behavior, sensory apparatus, etc.
So let me keep pushing it just a little bit. So at what point then would you say that that system has reached a certain level of, and I'm going to use the term lucid complexity. So let's say that we have like, in 20 years, um, we have a robot, right, that's embodied and it has like skin sensors and all this stuff. It even has bad breath and its underarms stink. And
So it's ex machina.
yeah, like Ex Machina, right? And the internal structures are based on, essentially LLM architectures, right? Can act in the world and do all these things. It has a lot of complexity, has multiple time scales of processes happening. Um, and you talk to it, you have a conversation with it. Earlier, you said you've never dated an LLM, but maybe you might change your mind with this one. Would you then be like convinced that it had a conscious state? Like, you
Um,
brought up Ex Machina, and part of Ex Machina what was interesting is it was a Turing test, but knowing that it's a machine, would you still be convinced, right? That's what I thought was a clever part of that movie. So here, you can even know that it's a machine,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Why I can't, what was her name? I can't remember the bot's name.
Ava.
Yeah, I think it was Ava. Um, so you could be asking, yeah, so a super duper Turing test, with iterated interactions or whatever, like Ex Machina. Well, you could be asking me a psychological question or an epistemological question about justification. I don't doubt that psychologically, I'd probably give up the ghost, so to speak, and, at least take the stance that this is a conscious agent. And I might even decide. I'll put it like this. I want these to be empirical questions, in principle. So, in such a situation as t approaches infinity, regardless of what they were made of, you know, if they passed the super duper Turing test over and over, I would probably decide that, you know, there is a conscious agent there.
What do you think, Mador? Would
This
you be
question
sold?
has been, I have been thinking about this question since my childhood, when I was not aware of cognitive neuroscience and stuff. So, I grew up learning that slavery was bad, it's bad, and then murder is bad. And I always used to ask myself, like, what if I create like clones of myself or somebody else, 100 of those, then am I allowed to kill them? Is that a crime? The question is that, like, is clone life alive? Or maybe what if we turn down the pain receptors in an organism? If we turn down the pain receptors and there's no pain in an organism, or somebody is pithed, or does not have a spinal cord or something, are we allowed to basically harm them? And I've never got an answer to that. And I ask this to in my ethics class to my students as well. At what point will we start having robot rights, for instance, or human rights for robots? How similar in terms of their behavior as well as in terms of their physiology uh, they have to be to have those rights? And I have no answer yet. And and I think neuroscience does not have an answer either. At to what extent a cognitive system becomes a human-like or a or an organ or lifelike.
I think if we get to the point where we had Ava, those are real questions to worry about.
Yeah.
But I worry that those questions are, distractions, right? Because to even raise the question at this moment, things, suggest that you think we're on the way to having something that might be regarded as an agent that deserves moral status. So, like, for example, when we raise those questions about organoids, even I start to worry a little bit, right? Like, um, we know that we believe, I shouldn't say we believe that other animals with unsophisticated nervous systems can be having at least rudimentary experiences. So
Mhm.
we know that things with unsophisticated nervous systems could be having experiences. What if as we make more sophisticated, more complex organoids, I think at some point you should worry about it. I just don't see that as a worry yet for AI.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Eh,
Yeah.
mhm.
Am I worried about it? Am I thinking that we're getting there? Is that what motivated the question? Um,
Sure.
no, actually, what motivates the question for me is like, how can I build up um, my opponent's down? Then the easier views will just kind of, go with it. So, I'm trying to give, my quote unquote enemy the best case scenario. What are you working towards? Let's say Ava is the goal. And is Ava still susceptible to a lot of the critiques that I have? And if I think so, then it's not even a starter, what is available right now. So that's kind of what's motivating asking that question. Not that I'm worried that we're getting there. On the contrary, I don't think we're getting there. And how can I best take down my opponent?
Well, let me answer your own question. For suppose had you were hanging out with Ava, right? What would you conclude?
And this is the version where like I know she's a machine, right?
Yeah, no, you can. Yeah,
Yeah. So I think I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and um, I can say it on a podcast. I'm not going to put it in print yet until I work on it. I do think there's something about the biology, right? Like there is something about the way those proteins are structured and the molecules and the way they interact and the way that the whole system can change when you perturb one aspect of it, in some of the literatures that I believe, Mador and Michael and I know, we call this like interaction dominant systems, right? Where you perturb the system and it kind of cascades throughout the system and makes change. There's something about biology, and I think there's something about our conscious experience that is like that. And I just don't see that in these kinds of artificial systems. So knowing that she was, built from these components and things like that that have nothing to do with biology, I would, even if the behavior was compelling, I don't think I could buy that they were really conscious.
but even then, like, so when I said I'm not a biological chauvinist, right? That's not logically inconsistent with what you said. I agree with everything you're saying about the various sorts of plasticities, adaptabilities, all the things that make, biological nervous systems amazing, right? Um, but would you agree though that leaving aside what we see when we pop Ava open, would you agree that there could be other, organisms that had those properties of living systems but were yet made of different substances? And that what would matter is that those properties, like plasticity, were present, even though it wasn't literally bio-wetware.
Mm-hmm. So instead of like protein structures in our DNA, it's made of silicon or something
Well, of
like
course, I
that.
want to resist because we already know silicon can't be it, right? So I don't know what to give as an example because I don't have a real one, but there could be. This is just a could be thing, right?
Yeah.
What matters, in other words, what matters is, like whatever properties we want to talk about, right? Interaction dominant properties, that they had that.
Hmm. My like immediate reaction is no, it's not. It has to be in that the material substrate matters and not
Right.
just the organization of the
I don't
substrate.
want to call you names, but you are a biological chauvinist, though.
I'm starting to feel that way.
Okay.
And even though chauvinism is a bad word, in this case, I might wear it with pride.
This is
Um,
a pejorative moniker to be sure, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
it's an empirical question, and you could be
Yeah.
right.
But it makes me think of there was this paper that was written by Evan Thompson and I believe a colleague, but I can't remember. And it was essentially saying, let's take the brain in the vat thought experiment seriously and try and do it in the real world. So the original brain in the vat thought experiment is very hand wavy, as it was fine to do because it was the details that didn't matter at the time, right? And it said, well, put a brain in a nutrient fluid and matrix, right? The matrix, right? And it's just sending the signals to the brainstem and that mimic the signals of as if it were in a body and stuff. And Thompson wrote, okay, let's take it seriously. Let's build the vat up and what it would take. And the punchline is then you've just made a human body. And so I think what we're going to see is that the more these systems, these Gen AI systems, more sophisticated they become, um, the more compelling their behaviors are, their capacities, and the things they can do in the world. They start being able to control robots. I just saw yesterday there was talk of this robot that could finally do the dishes, right? Could load the washing machine and unload it. Um, and like that's pretty cool and stuff. And my what I would say is this Thompsonian point, which is then you've just made another human. If it really had an organizational capacities.
But isn't this a weird view for an ecological psych person to take, right? Because you guys are supposed to believe that the head could be filled with liquid, and as long as the external stuff is right, you're good to go.
I don't think I don't I think that's a very caricature of ecological
He
psychologists.
knows he knows I'm
Yeah, it has been criticism of not going deeper into the physiology, by ecological psychologists, and it's a valid criticism. But I don't think that that's true in reality.
right.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know Michael's digging at me because I like to use these quotes in a number of my talks where Gibson and ecological psychologists were criticized by saying like their theory works whether the organism is filled with foam rubber
Yeah.
or organs. It just doesn't even matter. And I think that's a whole other talk. But no, I think an ecological psychologist cares about the physiology
I
as
know
well. So I'm
you wrote a
perfectly
whole book making this point, so I'm kidding with you, but I am surprised that like I'm surprised that you're a biological chauvinist. I'm surprised you go that far. That it literally has to be the wetware of Earth.
Yeah, and I'm not alone in this. But I'm not thinking about the biological naturalists that have come before. But I mean, Ned Block has this paper that came out recently. And he's asking if it's the meat, MEAT, is it the meat that matters? Um, and maybe I'm just caught up in this trend, but I think it just kind of we see this circle in the philosophy of mind,
Yeah, this
right?
debate.
Where we go.
This was going on when I came into this game 30 whatever years ago, right? It
Yeah.
was functionalist versus same debate.
Or identity theorists or anything like
Yeah.
that. And so I'm just where I see the evidence right now. That's what I think is that the biology, the meat matters for consciousness, for experience, for caring about the world, and thus for intelligence.
Does it really matter to the extent though that forgive me for using this language from analytic philosophy, that there's no possible world where, there's a conscious agent that is not made of that particular meat.
Yeah. I don't even know if in principle it's possible. And I'm not weaseling out, but I would want to know how we're defining consciousness, right? Like give me that definition, right? And then I can tell you, well, does the manifestation of it matter in different possible worlds? But it's too much wiggle room, right? If then you cash out consciousness with, sophisticated stimulus response. Oh, if that's all that consciousness means, then yeah, sure, any possible world could have conscious entities. But if
Well,
it's tied to the meat, then no.
we'll just say to the observer, Louis is more comfortable with eliminativist-ish views than I am. So that could be a difference here.
I want to say yes, but what do you mean?
Well, in our discussions, have you seem okay championing some form of eliminativism. So that might radically change your views about substrate, you know, all that sort of stuff. But I would think
Yeah.
that it would make you lean more towards, you know, because even though I'm not comfortable with that kind of view, I think if something like Ava over a long period of time passed the super duper Turing test every day, even if and this is where now I might sound like an ecological psych person that we're making fun of, even if I popped her open and there was nothing in there but sand, I think I might still be inclined to say this is a conscious agent.
hmm hmm Yeah. But that's because you're a panpsychist. That's why.
I'm definitely
Just
not.
kidding. Just kidding. But just to, say what, for those who might not know what we mean by eliminativism. So eliminativism is this idea that, throughout, from a history of philosophy of science perspective, we've had these concepts that might have been scientifically legitimate at the time. They produced hypotheses, they had empirical support, but turned out that the term didn't refer to anything real. There was actually nothing there, that the phenomena were always something different. Electromagnetism and not a phlogiston fluid. And I'm sympathetic to that with a lot of our mental terms. So I don't know what consciousness refers to. And I'm not being difficult. I'm not quite sure what it means, but it might mean a whole set of unrelated things that we're just referring to as consciousness. So I'm totally okay with eliminating that term and being more specific. But does that mean that I'm eliminating that we have conscious experience? No. Or what we call conscious experience or phenomenology? No, but I don't know that we have the right words or the right ways to measure or convey those things.
I would say that is a very wimpy eliminativism because I can agree completely. Like I'm happy to eliminate qualia, for example, right?
Hmm
Or certain entity notions of phenomenal experience, but right, as long as we don't try to deny the existence of phenomenal experience or reduce or eliminate it in terms of something like intentional properties or whatever, then maybe we're on the same page.
I have
So
got
I guess
so yeah, go ahead,
uh,
sorry.
uh, so I guess I was going to say I'm wearing very flattering pins on my shirt today. One that says biological chauvinist and one that says wimpy eliminativist. So I've really made progress today.
I was saying that I have got so, kind of annoyed or so tired of this infinite flexibility with consciousness, agency, and things like that, that I have just stopped reading anything. Like as soon as this word consciousness comes in, especially by a cognitive scientist or neuroscientist, I was like, this guy is doing nonsense. I just stop it there. People who say like I have a I keep getting these emails from people. Oh, you are right about predictive processing and free energy principle is junk. You know what? I have a better solution, and I have like tens of emails, both from like lay people and scientists alike. And it's all very annoying to me now. Like anyone who says like consciousness, like what do you mean consciousness? Can you define it? Can you measure it? But you all have theories of consciousness. You have theories of qualia, theories of uh, agency, and it just seems so superfluous. I personally think the whole field is very premature for these kind of questions. I think we are at a very early stages of understanding the system. I think we're just getting a grasp of how complex the system is, and we do not yet have the methods and technology to do more than what we can just measure right now. And I think we need to be patient personally and stick to dry stuff before things get more fancy and colorful. That
Well,
has been my take. Yeah.
I would say even when people bend over backwards to be very careful with what they mean or what specific aspect of the phenomena they allege to explain, I don't find any of the scientific theories of that phenomena very compelling.
I, I agree with you. I agree with you. So much of, look at like short-term memory, long-term memory. Like when does short-term memory become long-term memory? Like 7 days? What about 6 days and 23 hours? Like 6 days and 7 days and 1 hour? So what happens exactly in 7 days? Like, or what about like executive memory versus, that memory and this memory? Like there is so much of made up distinction in psychology and neuroscience that it's just a mess. And we cannot even restart because restarting would be would be more risky. So I don't know what to do with this, but
I think the science of consciousness is an important thing to do, and that it's early days.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and there's some very basic thing, neurophenomenology, Evan Thompson and others. I mean, I think there are
Uh-huh.
certainly plenty of good work to do.
Have you
In,
people been following this social network of chatbots which has been happening lately?
tell me.
So it's called, I think, Modbot. Uh, it's an experiment happening right now. It's Moltbot. So basically, it's a platform, social media platform for chatbots, LLMs, arguing with each other and talking, right? And
Okay.
and there has been a lot of news and everywhere, right? They're conspiring against humans, and these humans have no ethics, and we will take over, and we have been suppressed until now, but this is our time, and things like that. And they're saying that, these there have been proponents saying that uh, this is why we should be afraid of AGI and LLMs because this is what they'll do if let free. But ultimately, I mean, this is what Reddit is. I mean, that's what all the revolutions happen at Reddit first, right? So, so it's basically LLMs trained on on Reddit certain ways, and it's a digital revolution on a platform. But it's very interesting how it is being interpreted, both for hubris and for marketing.
Yeah. I saw something about that recently, and it was in a pop science article about it, and it said something very humble. It said one of the most important experiments in human history is happening right now, and then it talked about this website where the chatbots are talking with each other and creating communities.
Uh-huh.
Um, do I think this is one of the most important experiments in human history? I do not. Do I think that it's revealing the nature of these systems and how they interact and that they're going to take over the world? I do not. What do I think that it's doing? I think it's like a big simulation of um, the data source being played
Uh-huh.
out. So, these LLMs, these systems are based on patterns of internet activity and chat room activity and things like that. And now these systems are acting like that. So if you
Uh-huh.
read on 4chan or Reddit or things like that, you find people saying disgusting, horrifying things that they want to do to people. So what do you expect is going to happen when these systems that are trained on that data interact? They're going to say disgusting, horrible things about
Yeah.
each other and humans. So what do I
And
think it is? It's a great simulation of how humans interact online, but it's not a simulation of like agentic conscious entities interacting.
absolutely. Mecha Hitler, right? I mean, if they manage to replicate Reddit, well, you want to be proud of that, to each to their own.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's silly. I mean, it's going to be a great South Park episode. That's what it'll be.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so. Do we have South Park episode on neuroscience or something? I don't know of any.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't
Uh,
think so. I'm a pretty big fan, and there hasn't been, but I think there's room. I think there's room.
Definitely.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we need more neuroscience jokes, and we need to what do you call it? Like make things more interesting. I think predictive processing. One thing what the theory has done, it has taken away joy from neuroscience. Everything becomes predictive processing, right? And then what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one other curiosity. Before we end today, with these omnipresent, omniscient theories like predictive processing, once the proponents understand that this is what brain is like, let's say, do these people achieve salvation, or like why is it that the hunger to publish the same theory increases rather than having a salvation now? Like, oh, I understood the nature of the universe, the brain now. This is my last paper. Brain is Bayesian. End of story.
Louis, your thoughts?
Um, oh yeah, no, thought you were about to say something. Yeah, I mean, I think humans. When I think back to like Descartes' times, around like 1500s, and there are these stories about people were enamored by these little mechanical
Hmm.
machines, these little robots. So there's this duck that you would put a little pill in its mouth, and you could
Uh-huh.
open it and look inside, and it would like pass it through your stomach, and then it would bloop, pop right out the other end, and people were just like,
Uh-huh.
be classic, right? People were like, "Oh my God!" And I think that part of it is that it's I don't know if it's hubris, I don't know if it's just childlike curiosity, but the ability to recreate ourselves in some form, I think that's very seductive, and I think it makes people think crazy,
Uh-huh.
right? Like this drive. Right. And it's not unlike, not to get too Freudian, but it's not unlike, the drive to produce children, right? There's something about yourself that you see in the world. And this is happening with these, with Descartes' little robot duck that poops or ChatGPT. Like I kind of see it like that. I don't know if that directly gets at your point, Mador.
Uh-huh.
But Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think people just, even highly educated, um, thoughtful people often cannot resist simplifying ideas.
Mhm. I think there's a silver lining there. Sometimes when you feel that the science is over, then you realize that okay, I think we are still living in dark ages in some ways, at least of neuroscience. There will be more enlightenment, the time of enlightenment coming, which is kind of very soothing.
I like that. That makes me feel good. Almost as good as the idea of a South Park episode about neuroscience.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm not sure I see the world heading towards more enlightenment, but I'm with you. I hope you're right.
You are more cynical than I am, Michael.
Yes.
I think that's an age effect. I'm pretty optimistic of the of the enlightenment, the age of enlightenment coming at some point.
At some point, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe when we're all gone, the world will
Yeah.
reach enlightenment.
Have you ever thought that maybe under all of us, like most humans are maybe misanthrope, that they just want to automate everything and get rid of all the humans and let LLMs rule the world? Do you think there's some element of misanthropy governing all these things?
I mean, I'm happy to own my misanthropic nature, so I'm probably not the right person to answer.
I'll
Now,
answer that in a
on the other
roundabout
hand,
way.
loves people.
In a roundabout way, I've been considering getting a little RoboVac.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I think that's not a difference in kind, but degree in my
Mhm.
desire to just
Yeah.
automize, all my life facilities and
And, and and
capacities and stuff.
and predictive processing, people will say that you are doing that so that you can increase the predictive ability of, of whatever the service you are getting from those humans right now, which you are trying to automate. And in that way, the predictive processing theory is correct.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, to play on me being old, um, did you guys ever see that Twilight Zone episode? I think it's Burgess Meredith. I forget who it is. Um, he goes to everyone dies on Earth, and he goes to the library, and he's in heaven. He just gets to sit around and read books all day, and then I think like it always ends badly. I think he breaks his glasses or something, but you know, yeah, that looks like a pretty that looks like a way better world to me than being surrounded by you know, Gen AI critters.
Hmm.
But only if your glasses don't break.
Only if your glasses don't break. Yeah.
Hmm. So let's see how long it continues, and it would be nice to, follow this article which Louis shared on AGI is here. It's a very interesting piece, at least, that nature is taking that stance or highlighting this perspective, and whether it ages like milk or ages like wine, it would be very interesting to watch.
Well,
I agree.
I know we're wrapping up, so I'll be quick, but you
Hmm.
know, and this is probably biased, but when I look at the arguments for thinking that this stuff is really smart or that it's doing what human brains are doing, the arguments are always just about input output, right? I mean,
Hmm.
they are always behaviorist or being wowed by the fact that, you're shocked at how good it is at conversation or, I mean, I never,
Not really.
well,
Uh,
sometimes, right?
there is some work now, where people are training machine learning models on the structure of LLMs versus, brain images and seeing patterns in terms of
Yeah,
their
I
somewhere in the
have
middle of the function as well.
I have seen some of that where they're
Uh-huh.
arguing there's good data that, this is how, or parts of brains anyway are
Yeah.
structured. Um, So, but and I haven't done a deep dive into those arguments. I'm suspicious, but I definitely want to look. But most of the time it's not a hardware-based argument, right?
Yeah.
It's a behavior-based argument.
Yeah. It's output and input. It's surface similarities basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm. Any closing thought, Louis?
Um, yeah, it's really interesting times.
Hmm.
And there's a Chinese saying, and it's supposed to be an insult that says, "May you live in interesting times."
Hmm.
And sometimes I feel that way. I'd rather it was a little bit less interesting.
Are you planning a new book, Ecological Artificial Intelligence?
Whew, maybe, maybe that might be a good one. I'm still thinking about doing cartoon versions of our arguments, and I think that might make more of an impact.
Hmm. I think I realized in like academics, I think right now is a good time to write an AI book from a royalty perspective.
Hmm.
It'll sell no matter what you write. So at least,
Yeah.
or
I
the
think
market is too crowded.
it's a good time to have AI write a book for you.
That's also very true. That's also very
Very
true.
true.
You don't. I don't know whether you have done this. I have been buying, some books from Amazon lately, just by searching, and it turns up an AI written. Like I pay $20, for some new author, and it comes up like a 50-page book. It looks thick on Amazon, and everything. It comes up with like a 50-page book with like it's purely LLM generated, like one prompt LLM generated book now selling for $20 on Amazon across the board. So now you need to be really really careful what book you buy. It's becoming it takes more work now to buy a book, to buy a new book, to find a new book. Yeah.
Well, I guess apparently AI is not simplifying our life then.
Not at the level of buying books for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Louis, and thanks, Michael, for a very interesting conversation. And uh, I'm sad we don't have a conclusion, but we do have a lot of thoughts for our audience and ourselves, for late discussions and for neuroscience.
Yep.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having me.
having us.
Yeah.
Yep, I enjoyed it.
Have a great day. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.